Hey class, welcome to Unit 2. Today, in this unit, some of the things, because there's going to be more of these presentations as there were in Unit 1. In this presentation right now, what we're going to talk about is validity, and the rest of the topics are going to come in some other videos. So this video is going to be on validity. All right, so first of all, just a kind of a reminder, and I probably will type this to you as well. Remember, if you haven't done the heart test yet, to go do it. So think about it. What were your scores of that? Get them because we're going to use them in about a week and a half. Okay, so make sure you've done that. That's just a quick reminder. Okay, so validity, reliability, fairness, and bias. These are kind of some issues that we're going to be talking about in this unit. So look at the top picture here. We have all the arrows at the bullseye, and we say reliable and valid. Down here, we have the arrows here. We say reliable, but not valid. And over here, we have neither reliable or valid. Just think about those pictures for now. And then we have, Jon Stark from Game of Thrones. Brace yourself. The validity and reliability measurement confusion is coming. It is coming. But I will try to make it simple. And you can see the picture here with the guy in the mirror, a normal sized guy looking in the mirror and seeing like this huge monster, like athletic guy, showing like how something is maybe not reliable or valid. So just to kind of get us started. Okay, so think about this quote. We're going to talk about this more in the next thing that you guys do. You're actually the court case activity that we're going to do in here. But think about this. It's a very interesting quote. So just think about it, and I'll read it to you. To make tests equal, as in achieve equal results, different treatment of individuals is often necessary. For example, adding points for diversity, adding points for body type, for class, for a disability, for a location. The other option is to make everyone treated equally. Each of these ways results in disproportionate outcomes. So pause this video and just read this a few times and think about what it's really saying. Because we're going to start to get into making a test valid and reliable, and especially valid and reliable for certain groups, because on some tests, different groups actually perform differently than one another. And so the question is, how do we make it equal? And making it equal actually makes it unequal, and not making it equal also makes it unequal. So where do you win? Where is the balance? And that's what we're going to try to talk about. Where is that balance and what is it? Okay, so validity and reliability. So stop and pause and think about, why is this important? Why should we bother caring about validity and reliability? What does it matter? Just think about that. Okay, so what is validity? This is the definition from our textbook. It's the soundness of your interpretations and uses of students' assessment results. What does that mean? The soundness of your interpretations and uses of the students' assessment results. It's how are we using the scores? What are we doing with them? How are we interpreting them, and how are we using them? Okay, this is the definition from AERA. For those of you not familiar with AERA, they're the academic, research association that we use in the social sciences. So like every single education professor, instructional designer, educational psychologist, all knows what AERA is, and they're kind of our main research organization. So they define a validity as refers to the degree to which evidence and theory support the interpretations of the test, entailed by the proposed uses of it. So it's not much different. But they've expanded it a little bit to also include the use of test scores is what's evaluated, not the test itself. So the test itself, we're not testing. We're testing the use of the scores. Begins with a statement on the proposed interpretation and rationale, and the interpretation refers to the construct the test is intended to measure. Okay, now we're going to go through, I'm going to show you another definition, and we're going to look at Keynes, but so there are different kinds of validity. All right, excuse me. There are multiple kinds of validity that we look for when we're trying to determine if a test is valid. So if I'm like looking at the SAT test, for example, and I'm like, how is it valid? I'm going to look at each of these different kinds of validity and see how it measures up to them. So the first one is called construct. Um, the cause and effect, so it's really the quality. Like the cause and effect is correct. So like, do cigarettes cause cancer? Is that cause and effect? Is that correct? Is that so? That's construct validity. Is the construct of the test correct? So, for example, there's convergent and discriminant construct validity. Convergent is the correlation where there is supposed to be correlation. It means that measures that really should be related are really related. So, like, for example, I have this example, cigarettes cause cancer. We know that there's a strong correlation there. But, like, if we were doing when you do like a measure of correlation, correlation doesn't equal causation. It just is strong correlation. So if there's a strong correlation between like cigarettes, people who smoke also have large feet or something like that, and we say, well, that's nonsense. That doesn't make any sense. There might be correlation, but they're not really related, so it doesn't matter. And then discriminant is the opposite. And you're making sure correlation does not occur where it's not supposed to. That's all. That's all construct is. Is the correlation correct? Okay, content validity. This is what I think is probably the most important. Does the test measure what it's supposed to measure? Does it measure what it's supposed to measure? So that's like, we talked about in our last unit when I was talking about make sure you're actually testing all of your learning objectives. So am I testing something that's not a learning objective? Then we have a problem, right? Our content validity is incorrect. Face validity. So it's what you start with. Does it appear to be valid? So like without doing any testing, if an expert just looks at my test, does it pretty much seem like it's supposed to do what it's supposed to do? Because that's a good, like if an expert can look at it pretty quickly and say no, that's a huge, huge problem. It's kind of like we're testing the face validity. Like on the face of it, does this appear to be correct? Internal. The extent to which you are able to say that no other variables except the one you're studying cause the result. External. How well you can generalize the results to others. And criterion validity. Prediction about how someone will perform based on the test. So there's predictive and concurrent. Predictive is the extent to which it can be predicted, and concurrent is how strong is that relationship? How strong is that prediction? All right, so there are 4 principles of validity. And this is from Messick. I use Messick because that's what our book discusses, but there are a number of other, you know, authors who have come up with kind of that are well accepted. They kind of discuss this, but I think Messick's is just fine, so that's what we're going to use in here. But he talks about interpretations, uses, values, and consequences. So the interpretations. The interpretations you give to your students' assessment results are valid only to the degree that you can point to evidence that supports that appropriateness and correctness. Example, student takes a reading test each year, but suddenly rises this year. Okay, so how can we interpret that? Maybe their reading improved. Maybe their motivation on the test improved. Maybe their test taking skills improved. But in order to figure out what really happened, we need to offer evidence. So we need to claim, we need to see if the reading test, does the reading test, first of all, really measure the correct comprehension? Because maybe it's a bad test. Maybe that's why the reading test rose this year, because the test is bad. Maybe the student isn't any better. So we have to have some kind of evidence, such as, we talk to their teacher, and the teachers, we observe them, we look at their classwork, we start to look at, and we say, oh yeah, this student has improved significantly. It's more than likely the test is correct. But we don't just assume it's correct because of the test score right away. We look for that. We have to make sure that we're interpreting the score correctly. Okay, the uses. The uses you may make of your assessment results are valid only to the degree to which you can point to evidence that supports their correctness and appropriateness. For example, uses. And I just, talked about this. Is the student reading at their age or grade level? Are we using this test to diagnose problems or to place a student or to monitor someone? Um, if we were using it for, some kind of, we need to really validate that the test is measuring what we're saying it's going to measure, especially for something, a high stakes test like that. We can't just place a student in a reading group based on a test that was not done well. Then you need evidence for your use, such as proof that students who perform badly on the test and get help actually improve their classroom performance. And values. The interpretations and uses of your assessment results are valid only when the values implied by them are appropriate. So do you value the content and method of the test? Is it strong or weak? We're going to talk about correlation, but is it a strong or weak correlation? Like, if you don't think the test is really even good, how valid can it really be? And consequences. The interpretations and uses you make of your assessment results are valid only when the consequences of these interpretations uses are consistent with appropriate uses. So what does that mean? There are intended and unintended consequences of a test. Like we can say a kid improved in reading and math, but did they really improve? And what are like unintended consequences? Like all of a sudden we've put, let's say, and I'm using K to 12 as an example here because it's easy for all of us to see that, but feeling separate from class and friends, let's say we place a kid in a special reading class or a special reading group because of a test, that's a huge decision that we just made based on a score. So we have to really make sure that we're interpreting that score correctly. That is a consequence of interpretation. All right, and this is just for you guys to go look at it. These are some good charts in the book. As I said, I'm using version 6, so if you're using a different version, you might decide. But the first one is a chart on how to assess classroom test validity. Great chart to just keep. And the second one is how to attest standardized test validity. Both great charts to just keep because it's like a quick rundown of what I just went through, and it goes through and just gives you kind of like the step-by-step, here's what I want to do. So just good charts to have on hand if you ever need to do that. Okay. So, threats to validity. This is a little activity where obviously I just want you to pause the presentation and do it. But what I want you to do is pause this presentation and take a few minutes and come up with some threats to validity of a test. What are some things you've encountered that have threatened the validity of a test? So go ahead and pause it. Okay, come back. Hopefully you're back and we're not paused anymore. Let's go through some threats. Okay, first one is called opportunity to learn. And that's like, what is taught versus what is tested. So like there was a case down in Florida, maybe, 10, 15 years ago, maybe even 20 years ago. It was a while. I haven't, I probably read about it like 8 years ago. So it's probably like 8 to 10 years old. What was happening is if you didn't pass some final examination on your senior year of high school, you weren't able to graduate high school. The problem was there were every district has its own curriculum. So what was happening is there were students being tested on things like there might have been, let's say there's only one question on the test that you weren't taught. You didn't have the opportunity to learn. That's a threat to validity. And when you take a case like that to court, you win because there was not an opportunity to learn. That is a threat to validity. So what is taught versus what was tested? The students weren't taught what was on the test, so how could they be expected to pass it? Then there's test polluting practices, which are threats, such as cheating. A student that's really good at test taking skill, we're going to talk about test taking skills in here. They make a significant difference. Then there's design and content aspects, like are things in a certain order or position that could affect the validity of the test? Possibly. Item test types, like, and validity issues, like item test types means like, were we testing performance? Are we testing a portfolio versus like an objective, like multiple choice test? How are we testing? Contemporary social issues, like high stakes testing. If you go back to like, and we're going to talk about like some other countries in this course as well, but if you go back to like, Japan in the month of June, they have the highest suicide rate because of their test, which I don't know, I can't remember the year off the top of my head, but they have the highest suicide rate because if you don't do well on that test, you can't continue on in school, and it determines what you're going to do. So, the threat to validity is that stress of that test because it's so high stakes. Authenticity and impact of one or more individual differences, like someone has a learning preference for something, or they have test anxiety. Like, if you're really, really anxious when you take a test, is that your true score? We'll talk about that. And here are just some other factors which can affect this as well. Things like history, like specific, like, history is like, if is the test going to be really valid if, something really bad, like there was a cancer diagnosis in the family, and then the student went and took that test. It's no longer valid for them, and it's no longer reliable either. So you can go through and just read these. I'm not going to read through each one of these. So if you want to pause it and just read these, go ahead and do that. Those are just more threats to validity. And that's it. Coming back in the next video.